Welcome to the Fearfully and Wonderfully Me podcast, a podcast designed to help you increase your influence, develop your leadership, and maximize your results. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast episode. Last podcast episode, we really drilled down into how to increase your influence at work, specifically how to climb to the first step on the ladder of influence at work and some ways you could do that. And then I had the thought that, number one, the probably the biggest opportunity for increasing your influence at work and climbing to the first step on the influence of ladder of influence at work is relative to dealing with change. And I did touch on that in the last podcast episode, but I thought, you know what, let's break that down and drill down deeper into that because we could talk all day about how when change happens at work, if you snooze, you lose, right? Because when change happens, some people whine, some people shine. And your influence is 100% being impacted by whether you are a shiner or whether you are a whiner. I think it's really powerful when we realize, like Max says, shiny objects get noticed. Well, so do shiny people. And when change happens, we have such a major opportunity to increase our influence. And the problem is that most of us don't like change unless it's our idea. And let me tell you, I will just be upfront with the fact that I, particularly early on in my career, didn't like change. I didn't want things to change. I wanted things to stay the same. I like the sameness, the status quo, the known quantities. But when change would happen, as it always does, I would resist it. I would try to, hold it back. I would try to keep things the same, or I would complain about it. And it cost me influence. And it took me a while to realize that, and it also took me an even longer while to rebuild it. So I wanted to just touch on that and kind of give you some thoughts on that. Mike and I wrote a whole book dedicated to leading yourself and others through change. We co-wrote the book. It's called Change Happens. And essentially, in the book, we came up with 15 key points and um, key points relative to leading yourself and others through change. And you in the book, you have Mac's perspective and you have my perspective. And imagine that we co-wrote the book and we are still married. So that's always a good thing, right? Anytime we work together on projects, because we are so different and we work differently and in different ways, we always have to learn how to value the differences. And it is valuable, but we had to learn how to work together instead of against one another. And this book really highlights that we're able to do that now these days. So I just wanted to, I certainly won't share the whole book with you, but I wanted to share some of the key points on a specific chapter. And this is chapter 6 from the book, where we talk about if you snooze, you lose. When change happens, if you snooze, you lose. And again, this comes from the book Change Happens, Leading Yourself and Others Through Change, that Mac and I co wrote. So, in the chapter dedicated to if you snooze, you will lose, there are 7 ways that you lose when you snooze. So, I wanted to kind of give you an overview of those because, there again, when we understand that change is going to happen, number one, and number two, we understand when change happens, we can embrace it and increase our influence, embrace the opportunities and the possibilities instead of resisting it, we can increase our influence. And number three, understand that even if we don't love change, even if we don't like change, when we know how it impacts our influence to embrace it versus resist it, we are much more likely to embrace it, right? Because we realize the importance and the value of embracing change and shining instead of whining. So, 7 ways you lose when you snooze, when change happens. Number one, you will have less meaningful, positive influence in every direction. And no one would ever choose to intentionally decrease their influence. But think about it from your perspective. If you were the leader of two people and maybe a new change is coming, a big change is coming, maybe it's a new software system for the organization and how you process your workflow. And it's a big change. And if you're the boss, you have two people on your team, they're both equally gifted, talented people. But when this change happens, one of them is whining and complaining and resisting and refusing to learn, and the other one is embracing with it and saying, "You know what? Let's go with it. Let's find the good things about this, the positives of the situation." They're, maybe going to extra trainings or helping other people. So they're just really embracing change with this new software system. And if you were the boss, if you're the leader of these two people, and you only had money in the budget to give one of them a raise, which one would it be? And it's kind of a no brainer. Of course, you would give the one who is embracing the change and trying to be helpful and leading the team through this change. You wouldn't give the raise to the whiner or the shiner or the whiner. You'd give it to the shiner. So thinking about it from that perspective, the first way that you lose influence when you snooze, when change happens, you have less meaningful positive influence in every direction. Number two, if you are constantly resisting change, you will not be asked for input in the future, right? And that's how your decreased influence starts to show up over time. Because when change happens, if you resist it and you go kicking and screaming through it, pretty soon everybody's going to figure out, hey, so you don't like change. And so they're not going to ask you for input on future changes. They don't want to talk with the people who are more worried about preventing change because or figuring out why things won't work. They want to talk to people, to game changers who figure out why things will work, to embrace possibilities. Number 3, and this is a big one, but you won't even know when this happens. But number 3, you will be passed over for promotions in the future. If you snooze, you will lose when it comes to being promoted and when change happens, because when change can fuel our growth, right? And advancement, because it's that opportunity to step up and lead yourself and others at a higher level. And if you don't step up and lead yourself and others at a higher level, it's costing you opportunities in the future. And this has happened in organizations where I've worked. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. And sometimes I was the leader looking at two people and realizing that one of them was a whiner and one of them was a shiner, and then a future opportunity would come up and I had to choose who would get that opportunity, and every time it would go to the one who was embracing change. So why would anyone who's responsible for leading change consider promoting the person who's resistant to change? They wouldn't. So when you resist change, it's like waving a big red flag and saying, "Hey, I resist change." Probably wouldn't be the most effective leader in the future for the organization. Number 4, you'll be passed over for pay increases. A lot of times people don't want the extra responsibility that comes with promotions, but pretty much all of us want an extra raise, right? I mean, if you're working in an organization or even if you're working in business for yourself, I mean, you're not necessarily working to make money. There's more to life and work than that. But money is a very helpful byproduct, right? You need money to pay your bills, and most of us want a pay increase for the work that we're doing. Well, the impact of resisting change is the same in promote as in pay raises as it is for promotions. You could be passed over for potential pay raises or special bonuses or special projects because you're resisting change. And those who support and embrace change will be rewarded. It may take some time, but they will be rewarded. And those who are resisting change and they're snoozing because they don't like change or they're afraid of change will be passed over for potential pay increases. Number 5, you will be seen as part of the solution instead of part of the problem, right? So the impact on your career path is magnified in conversations you may never even know about. Because when it comes to change, your leader is got to be constantly discussing who's on board and who's not on board, and it's usually very, very obvious who's on board. Usually it's not like you have to really go think about who's on board, who's not, because most of the time we're very vocal, and who we are inside is affecting our influence outside of us with our professional relationships. Leaders want to know who's helping them, who's on board, and who's not, who's hurting them and who's not on board. And leaders want people who are on board. Number six, you might be actually demoted. Well, this doesn't usually happen too often, because if you choose to be part of the problem, you're part of the problem. And most of the time, it's just easier for those who embrace change to excel and step up, and more more focus is given to that than actually demoting people who resist change. It does happen, and I have seen it happen. Someone who just wasn't effective in embracing change and wasn't willing to embrace change. And you may actually be asked to step down to a lesser position, or perhaps offered an opportunity to early retire or released to the next chapter, right? That's absolutely a possibility. And that leads us to number seven. You might be terminated. The ultimate loss of choices, right? Because now you're paying the price for your choice to resist change, and you don't have any more choices relative to working in that organization. So, absolutely, you can go find another job, but it's going to take some time. It's probably a frustrating process, and maybe your family has to pay some of the consequences, right? If you lose your job because you are resisting change, then that might cost you certainly one paycheck, maybe more than that. And so now the people around you at home in your personal life are paying the price of your choices. So I love Jerry Sternan's quote. It's easier to act your way into new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. Right? It's not just enough to know that we should embrace change. We actually have to do it. And it's not intuitive, because change does always bring with it that fear of the unknown, fear of, what if I don't like the new future? What if I can't go back? And we don't like the unknown. People mostly don't like the fear of the unknown is fearful because it's unknown, it's scary, it's an unknown quantity. And so most of us don't like that. We like to generally know what's coming, right? Relative to our professional career, particularly. So it's not necessarily intuitive to embrace change, because change can be stressful. It causes us to cross the gap between what we know and what we are doing, to what we want to be. And that means doing something different. It raises our stress level even a little bit, because we have to think about things consciously, slowing down and thinking through them rather than just going through the motions like we always did. And so it's not intuitive to embrace change. But when it comes to change, that is the number one way to increase your influence relative to the ladder of influence at work. Embracing change, because it's not intuitive. Not everybody will embrace change. And if you're the one who steps up and embraces the change and says, "Hey, let's let's focus on continuing to win for the organization. Let's focus on embracing the change and looking for the positives." And if you're the one who stands out and takes that initiative and takes that lead, guess who gets more influence with the leaders in the organization? You will. It's common sense, but it's not always commonly practiced. But I guarantee you, this is an opportunity for you to shine, to stand out, and to increase your influence professionally. Until next time.